to mute your microphones. That is because this is a webinar. So don't even worry about that. The chat is available right now. And then you will be able to, during the program, you'll be able to submit questions via the Q&A. So what I'm going to do right now is introduce our panel. And I'm going to do it alphabetically in case you're wondering about how I chose the order. I'm going to start with Steve Almond. He is the author of 11 books of fiction and nonfiction, including the New York Times bestsellers Candy Freak and Against Football, and most recently, William Stoner and the Battle for the Inner Life. His short fiction has appeared in numerous anthologies, including the Best American Short Stories, the Pushcart Prize, the Best American Mysteries, the Best American Erotica. Steve. His essays have appeared in the New York Times Magazine and elsewhere. He teaches at the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Wesleyan University and lives outside Boston with his wife, 3 children, and considerable anxiety. That's Steve. Alan Brooks, who wins the prize for facing the most adversity in his appearance here tonight. His power is out in Baker thanks to our 10-minute storm that we just faced here in Denver. He's our moderator tonight, and he teaches graphic novel writing at Regis University. He's the writer and creator of The Burning Metronome graphic novel, a supernatural murder mystery with social commentary. He hosts the popular Mother Bleeper in a Cape. I'm such a coward. I wondered if I was comics podcast, which focuses on marginalized members of the geek world. He writes the Colorado Sun's weekly comic, What Did I Miss?, as well as comic books for pop culture classroom, Zenescope, entertainment, and more. In addition, Alan is a musician and noted stage host, regularly emceeing celebrated events like the Dink Awards Show, a Rise Music Festival, and tonight's Lit Fest Salon. See how I did that?
Well done.
Thanks, Alan. Melissa Febos is the author of the memoir Whip Smart and the essay collection Abandon Me, which was a Lambda Literary Award finalist, a Publishing Triangle Award finalist, an Indie Next pick, and was widely named as a best book of 2017. I totally concur, by the way. Her third book, Girlhood, an illustrated essay collection, is forthcoming in 2021 from Bloomsbury. Sorry. In 2018, Febos was the inaugural winner of the Jean Cordova Nonfiction Award from Lambda Literary and the recipient of the Sarah Verdone Writing Award from the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. Her essays have recently appeared in Tin House, Granta, McSweeney's, The Believer, The Swanee Review, and the New York Times. She's an associate professor at the University of Iowa, where she teaches in the nonfiction writing program. And she's a favorite around here, in case you didn't know. Finally, Jenny Offill is the author of the novels Last Things, a New York Times Notable Book of the Year and a finalist for the LA Times First Book Award, Department of Speculation, which was shortlisted for the Folio Prize, the Penn Faulkner Award, and the International Dublin Award, and her latest, Weather, which came out earlier this year. She lives in upstate New York and teaches at Bard College. I want to mention that all of these authors' books are on sale in the Tattered Cover virtual store. So please check the chat for a link to that. And thank you for being here. And I'm passing it off to Alan.
Hello, hello. All right, so listen, the plan, I'm going to tell everybody the plan was here just so you kind of know what to expect. We're going to do some quick readings. We're going to go alphabetical order again. And then we'll have our discussions about how we deal with criticism and the comments, etc. And then at the end, we're going to try and save some time for some of your questions, which I assume we'll be getting in the chat. But for now, oh, and also I'll just make my little warning. I am without power. The power's still off. So I'm running on my phone Wi-Fi and the battery power on my laptop. So if I disappear mysteriously, I want you all to just continue bravely in my absence. Are you inspired? Was that a good pep talk?
Yeah.
All right, let's get a reading from Steve, first of all.
Okay, so we'll get to, I guess, how we deal with criticism or commenters, and I'm just super psyched you guys are here and that we get to talk about this because I think about it all the time. And actually, one of my little DIY books is called Letters from People Who Hate Me. And it is, in fact, full of letters from readers of my work of various sorts, mostly my political work, who, in fact, do hate me. So I'll read a couple of those because I had a lot of fun both reading those letters and feeling despair over the state of humanity and then also responding to them. So maybe I'll read one of those or a couple if we have time. The first one begins, "You ignorant slut. As an independent in this great state of Massachusetts, I have never read anything as obscene and offensive as your recent article in the Boston Globe. You're a pitiful idiot and live in a box way over on the left box, covered in utopian angst. I hope you don't mind. I have submitted your name for sphincter research. Their office said that donating your body would cover their needs for the next 100 years. Signed, Richard Cranium." And then I respond to Richard, "Dear Richard, wait, were you able to get through to someone at Sphincter Research? All I ever get is that annoying phone menu, for anus research, please press 1. For genital research, please press 2. I've been using the toll-free number, 1-800-MY-HOLES, but maybe there's a direct line you could give me? Or no, wait, Richard, do you know someone on the inside at Sphincter Research? I'll bet you do." Okay, so that's the first letter. I'll read one more of these. They're fairly short. This one begins, "Dear asshole, you're a fucking idiot, and your daughter in the picture on your website looks like a maggot. You're a disgraceful American, and it would have been so nice if you had been a passenger on one of the planes that crashed into one of the World Trade Towers on 9/11/01. Signed, Joseph Kelly." I assume Joseph Kelly is not in this webinar, but if you are, please raise your hand. And then my little response to Joseph's, these letters are verbatim, I should tell you. I've edited them for length, but not for tone. All right, so that's Joseph Kelly's letter. And I respond, "Dear Joseph, okay, you got me. My daughter does have kind of a maggoty look to her. For a while there, my wife and I were able to delude ourselves. I guess all parents do. We tell people her skin was alabaster or sometimes pearlescent. We thought it might be the kind of soap we were using, but I think in our heart of hearts, we knew something was wrong with her. Then came her first interaction with carrion. There was some kind of dead animal in our backyard. My wife says it was a rabbit, but I'm almost certain it was an opossum. Anyway, Josephine somehow got wind of it, and we found her out there burrowing into the thing's eye socket. The neighbors came out to watch. It was kind of awkward. I guess it would be sort of like if you, Joseph Kelly, found yourself talking to some buddies at a party and you said, you know that guy Steve Almond, I totally wish he'd been killed in the 9/11 attacks. And this voice behind you says, yeah, totally. We should have killed that filthy infidel Almond. And you turn around, hoping to maybe give the guy a high five, only to discover that it's Osama bin Laden. Okay, that's my reading. We've broken the profanity threshold.
Thank you,
I've done that
Steve.
for you, Jenny.
Right. Now we can say the name of my podcast safely. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's why.
Which is Motherfucker in the Cape. Yeah, that's okay. All right. So I guess going alphabetically, listen, so I'm also borrowing my girlfriend's laptop, which means that I had something prepared to show you guys because I'm doing graphic novel stuff. But instead, I'm going to go to the weekly comic that I write for the Colorado Sun. If I can show you that, is really the question here. Filling suspense. All right, applications. Boom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is this week's comic. The context of the comic is that it's about a white woman in her 50s who's missed 30 years of her life due to a coma, and she has conversations with her neighbor who is in his 20s and he's Black. And her missing years allow me to view a lot of things with a fresh eye. So this is the one that came out Friday, and just for the sake of it, I'm going to do the voices. All right. So this is written by me, art by Corey Redford. So the character Aussie says, "Man, I got all these emails and DMs everywhere." And Myra says, "Really? From who?" "White people. I mean, like, white friends who are devastated over the police killing George Floyd and all the other stories of murdered Black people. I know these friends have good intentions. It doesn't feel encouraging for you?" "I guess, but what they don't get is this is always present for me. It's just being recorded now so my liberal white friends can see it. But some small part of me is carrying all that tragedy every day." "So what would be helpful then?" "I guess to see them doing something, contacting the mayor, the police, protesting, boycotting, filing lawsuits. You know, all the things they do when they see someone mistreat a dog." And that is that one. Let me see if I can just throw another one up real quickly. Last week, it's funny doing a weekly comic because you really try to hit on things that are happening presently. But of course, there's a certain amount of timeliness involved. So this one came right when the protest began, and it felt right to me, just because it wasn't talking about what's happening. Ultimately, it did end up kind of, I think, let's go here. Find it like everyone say the thing that I'm clicking on. All right. They're on the street in their mask in Denver. Myra says, "We live in a society that doesn't reward compassion. A lot of us," and then, okay, loss taints everything. Without compassion, here I ask Corey to draw people who look when they're protesting, since become ruthless instead of community-minded. A camp from Georgia up there. Then she says, "Edge, or your neighbor turned selfish during a pandemic." And Ozzy says, "I'm sorry, I changed my Netflix password, okay?" I can hear all of you laughing, even though that you're not on the microphone. Everybody muted, I can feel it all. Anyway, that's it for me. That's some of what I do. Thank you guys for checking it out. Okay, so Melissa, I think you'll be next.
Okay, thank you guys so much. And I've done a few of these, but it's really weird reading to total silence, especially when things are funny. So I just want you to both know that I was laughing LOL here at home. So I am gonna read, I was talking with a friend this morning about how we're both former addicts, and we were just sort of speculating about people who are not former but current addicts, and how this would be a crazy fucked up time to be locked in your house and just everything. And so I decided to read something about quitting, because I'm thinking of all the people who might be trying to quit something on their own, or amid, the rise of fascism or whatever. Take your pick. So this is for the quitters. It's a little bit from something I'm working on right now. And it's set up like a journal, but I'm not going to read the dates or anything. I'm just going to read a few entries. It's called The Dry Season. Can you all hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up? Yeah, okay. The Dry Season, summer 2016. You're going to have to acknowledge the ridiculousness of making such a big deal out of 3 months of no sex, my mother reminds me unnecessarily. There are people who, I know, I tell her, of course I know that. Amy and I meet at the cafe on Bedford to work together. After a few hours of typing on our laptops at adjacent tables, we break for lunch. Over our exorbitantly priced grain bowls, I explain to her that I'm going to spend 90 days celibate. Amy has been single for 3 years. She finishes chewing her mouth full of greens and swallows. Oh, so you're going to give up sex for 3 whole months. She laughs richly like a villain in a children's cartoon and then concludes, fuck you. There are different kinds of celibacy. In the 13th through 16th centuries, the Beguines were religious orders of women in Northern Europe who lived in semi-monastic communes called Beguines, each with their own self-designated rules. They were celibate and unmarried, but they took no vows, did not give up property, and could leave at any time. They traveled, preached, and lived more freely than most women in the world. For years, I had a glittery bumper sticker on my old car that said in voluptuous font, "Don't quit, surrender," one of the more sanctimonious 12-step slogans. My ex-girlfriend and I put it there for laughs, but over the years, my reading of it became increasingly earnest, especially after we broke up. Don't you think you should take a break? My mother asked me when I was 32. I had just ended a 3-year relationship. I'd not been single since my first relationship at 15. I'd been preoccupied with one person or another since I was 11 years old. Probably, I said, though I'd already begun the next one. The Beguines didn't quit sex. They quit lives that held men at the center. They gave up sex as the cost of that freedom. Surely it was no sacrifice for some. To put God in the center of their lives required freedom from men. It meant putting themselves and each other at the center. Even men who claim to put God at the center of their own lives want women to put men at the center of theirs. I've quit many things. When I was younger, I was always leaving. I never even told some jobs that I'd quit. I just stopped showing up and never walked down that street again. Once, I quit a man that way. This kind of quitting eventually shrunk my world to a thimble, though a thimble is still big enough to drink from. It seems unfair to call an addiction the attachment one's been encouraging one's whole life. But what is unfair is not necessarily untrue. I could blame patriarchy for almost everything and be righteous, but at a certain point, the issue isn't whose fault it is, but how to get free. Barth wrote in A Lover's Discourse, throughout life, all of love's failures resemble one another, and with reason, they all proceed from the same flaw. In my case, I suspect it's more than one flaw, though if I can correct just the one, it will be a happy miracle. This is the last one. The miracles of women are always more labor than magic, I've discovered. St. Catherine of Siena drank the pus of the dying and starved herself half to death for most of her life. Her rewards were exemption from marriage and the liberty to preach like a man. She mockingly referred to the Pope as daddy and scolded him publicly. By the time she actually starved herself to death, she was one of Italy's leading ecclesiastical authorities and statesmen. Historically, at least, celibacy has often been the bedrock upon which our sovereignty is built. That's it. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. Yes. All right. Jenny, you ready? You're taking that drink. You're ready.
I'm ready. I seem to be the only one that didn't figure out that I should have put something on the screen so I could read without holding a book. But yeah, that's the Luddite. That's the Luddite in me. I'm just going to read from the very beginning of my new novel, Weather. The narrator's a librarian, and it takes place on just a day where she's at the library. In the morning, the one who is mostly enlightened comes in. There are stages, and she's in the second to last, she thinks. This stage can be described only by a Japanese word. Bucket of black paint, it means. I spend some time pulling books for the doomed adjunct. He's been working on his dissertation for 11 years. I give him reams of copy paper, binder clips, and pens. He is writing about a philosopher I've never heard of. He is minor, but instrumental, he told me. Minor, but instrumental. But last night, his wife put a piece of paper on the fridge. Is what you're doing right now making money? It said. The man in the shabby suit does not want his fines lowered. He is pleased to contribute to our institution. The blonde girl whose nails are bitten to the quick stops by after lunch and leaves with a purse full of toilet paper. I brave a theory about vaccinations and another about late capitalism. Do you ever wish you were 30 again? Asked the lonely heart engineer. No, never, I say. I tell him that old joke about going backward. We don't serve time travelers here. A time traveler walks into the bar. On the way home, I pass a lady who sells whirling things. Sometimes when the students are really stoned, they'll buy them. No takers today, she says. I pick out one for my son, Eli. It's blue and white, but blurs to blue in the wind. Don't forget quarters, I remember. At the bodega, Mohan gives me a roll of them. I admire his new cat, but he tells me it just wandered in. He will keep it, though, because his wife no longer loves him. I wish he were a real shrink, my husband says. Then we'd be rich. My brother's late, and this after I took a car service so I wouldn't be. When I finally spot him, he's drenched, no coat, no umbrella. He stops at the corner, gives change to the woman in the trash bag poncho. My brother told me once that he missed drugs because they made the world stop calling to him. Fair enough, I said. We were at the supermarket. All around us, things tried to announce their true nature, but their radiance was faint, and fainter still, beneath the terrible music. I try to get him warmed up quickly. Soup, coffee. He looks good, I think, clear-eyed. The waitress makes a new pot, flirts with him. People used to stop my mother on the street. What a waste, they'd say. Eyelashes like that on a boy. So now we have extra bread. I eat 3 pieces while my brother tells me a story about his NA meeting. A woman stood up and started ranting about antidepressants. What upset her most was that people were not disposing of them properly. They tested worms in the city sewers and found they contained high concentrations of Paxil and Prozac. When birds ate these worms, they stayed closer to home, made more elaborate nests, but appeared unmotivated to mate. But were they happier, I ask him? Did they get more done in a given day? Thank you.
All right. Celebratory beatbox to all the panelists. All right. So listen, we're at 6:30 now. So what I think is I'll ask an initial question. We can kind of share things, and then we might look at what questions people are sending in. The thing that I was thinking of was, at its base, how do you distinguish good criticism from just negative, somebody trying to tear you down? Anyone wants to jump in on that? If not, I'll go first. How about that? So listen, I try to not live my life by memes because I think that's stupid, right? But there's one meme that I saw that was very good. The meme said, don't take criticism from people you wouldn't take advice from. And I think that is an important distinction, right? So the worst criticism I ever got was from an editor of a comics publisher. I think they're in St. Louis. She's not there anymore. But she read the first book I put out and wrote back that the dialogue was unreadable and that the art was sloppy and all of these really pointed things. And I took a day with it because it definitely was hurtful. I took a day with it, and then I looked at it again, and I was like, oh, she's actually just trying to be mean. She's not trying to talk about how to improve or what the brand of the publisher is. And I responded like, okay, thank you. And then she wrote back some more mean stuff. So then it was confirmed for me. I was like, oh, she really is just trying to tear me down. And it allowed, actually her turning up the meanness allowed me to shake it off a little easier. Do any of you guys have examples like that?
Yeah, I have a lot of examples like that. And I think I I don't know, my relationship to criticism of my work has evolved a lot over the years. And in the beginning, I think I was just like wanted everybody to like me and to like what I was doing, and was going to try to help that along as far as I could. And I had this with my first book. I was interviewed by this woman who had had a very similar experience that I had written about. And so I sort of like skipped to this interview, and she was also reviewing my book. And I was like, finally, someone who's really going to understand what it was like to be a dominatrix. And it was just a total setup. And the interview was really mean. And I was like working really hard to be honest and like vulnerable, which was a huge mistake. And then the review came out the next day. And in it, she had said that while reading it, she wished that she could slap me. Like, it was really mean. And I was totally devastated, you know, and it sort of went on like that for a while. She got a little bit obsessed with taking me down for whatever reason. And it sort of started this process of ruminating about my experience of criticism that at like fast forward, it's been over 10 years now since then. And I don't know if this is going to sound radical, but not after what you said, it's because it's basically the same thing. But at this point, I feel like I don't read comments. I mostly don't respond to like nasty tweets at me about stuff. And I respect critics. Like I write criticism myself sometimes, but I largely consider it basically none of my business, because I have like a really big, strong community of writers and editors and friends and my partner and people who I know and trust and whose taste I know and trust, who vet my work before it ever gets to the public. And so just as you said, like a critic, even the one who's really respected or accomplished, is still almost always a stranger to me. And I'm not really soliciting feedback from strangers on my work. And so I'll be hurt by it, but I pretty much work as hard as I can to sort of let it go as soon as that happens. Good reviews too, all the same.
Yeah. Well, I got to say that thing of not reading the comments, that I feel like that's always the best. Because I'll be reading an article about applesauce and then make a mistake and read the comments. And I'll be like, how did it turn racist? It was just about applesauce. You know?
Yeah. It's like in 2 moves, they can turn it racist. Yeah.
Right.
It's dark.
Right.
Yeah.
Jenny, Steve, what are your experiences with this?
Well, I find that negative criticism really sticks with me because I guess we're just wired that way. I'm not actually on social media, so I don't get to read a lot of what strangers say about me. Every once in a while, someone will helpfully share something particularly mean that was said about me. I'm never sure quite of the motivation of that, but every once in a while, someone makes a mean comment that is so mean. It's just kind of funny. I remember about one of my children's books. Someone wrote, this book would have been better if it was longer and more funny. And I was just like, I don't want to put that as a blurb on all my books now. You know, that's like actually a legitimate criticism of my work as a writer. And, you know, they might have been zeroing in on this particular story about a sloth, but I think it fits the novels too. So, but wiser heads prevailed in the publicity meeting, and I did not get to have that as a tagline. So I thought it was, I would buy a book that said that. But.
Right.
Jenny, I actually begged my publisher of one of my story collections to run the nastiest comments on the back.
Yeah.
Because I think in a very literal way, when it generates that kind of anger, I'm like, what's going on there?
Yeah, let's read that.
It got under somebody's hood, but it's fascinating. Like, to me, when people react to your work very angrily, they're trying to express something deeply honest and personal. It might be really destructive and fucked up. Like, I had a student once, and she wrote this student evaluation, and the sentence she wrote was, if writing was a part of my body, I would, like, this professor's terrible. If writing were a part of my body, I would cut it off with an X-Acto blade.
Wow.
Wow.
I remember, like, I used to post the negative student evals on my wall, but when somebody's that, like, there's pain there, and
Yeah.
you don't
Yeah.
have to, it's not your responsibility. I guess when you're a professor or teacher, it is kind of your responsibility. Like, my response to that was, I somehow, by some combination of how I conveyed my lack of regard for her work, or maybe difficult truths that I was delivering at a time that she was feeling vulnerable, really made her feel terrible about herself and her capacity to write. And that, I think, is worth taking in and recognizing. And I wrote, a whole book in response to these, and I've written articles in response to people who are sort of trying to troll you in one way or another, because I do think that, especially now, like, there is deep meaning in people's rage, and the kind of the id that gets released in the comment section. Doesn't mean you have to
Mm.
wallow in it, but to me, it is a kind of muse if you treat it that way, because regardless of how fucked up and angry and homicidal their ideation is, it is an expression of some kind of pain. These letters that I
Yeah.
receive are deeply honest. If nothing else, they're really
Uh-huh.
honest about how people transmute their love into rage and, destruction.
Yeah, I think
Hmm.
that, Steve, you're getting at something that I've thought for a long time, which is that most criticism, whether it's sort of abusive comments or a long, thoughtful essay comparing two books, it is always revealing more about the critic than it is about the work.
Hmm.
And I say that not in a derogatory way, but even when I'm writing as a critic, I feel like I do so with a pretty lucid understanding that what I'm doing is trying to communicate what I value in a work and
Right.
how this work accords with those values. And that's for whomever it's useful for. I'm not the arbiter of what's good. And I don't believe that there is an objective aesthetic
Uh,
good.
And you can see,
yeah, Steve.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Jenny.
I was just saying, you can see that even like in a bigger kind of cultural way. Like, I was lucky enough to have my first novel was translated into Italian. And I remembered that when it had come out here, since there's a mother in it who's she's bipolar, and she's seen by her daughter as very exciting and interesting. But when I would read from this book, sometimes people would stand up in the audience and they would say that those dreaded words, well, I haven't read the book, but, and then go on. And they would say, I just don't understand why she hasn't been taken away by child services, or blah, blah, blah. All this kind of interesting thing where it felt like someone else's life was coming. And, I'd say, well, it's because she's made of words, they can't take it. But I had this experience where the book came out in Italy, and I waited for the questions. And when people stood up, they all said, the mother in this book is the most beautiful, wonderful, spontaneous. And they had a completely different take on all the like risky behavior. And it was really interesting, because it also, I see that a lot. Like in America, the worst thing is they'll say you're pretentious. Oh, God forbid you're pretentious, or you're intellectually sort of too big for your britches. Whereas like in other places, they don't say that. So it can also be kind of like a broad, you can get a little bit of a broad picture even of like what is valued or denigrated in a society too.
Okay. Well, so I guess, in terms of common themes, what I'm hearing is, well, first of all, I think maybe one of the worst reactions is no reaction, right? But separating what people say from who you are as a person is important. And then also the point that Steve made about recognizing what their pain is, and thing Melissa said about how much it reveals who they are. I got death threats on a graphic novel I'm writing that is allegory for leaving white supremacy. This person sent them to me on Instagram on Christmas Day, right? And now, obviously there were a lot of feelings about it and stuff like that, but when I got a little distance from it, I really had to think about, what is it like for a person to be sitting on Christmas Day? What is going on in their lives that they're sending death threats to somebody that they've never met and probably never will meet? Like, are they not around family? Like, I think part of thinking about like what brings a person to the point where they're sitting and trying to put me in the crisis mode just that actually gives me some comfort because it's another separation. I realize this really is not about me. It's not about the content of my work. It's about whatever they're dealing with. And I think it allows me some space because I'm not as bulletproof as I would like to be. Like, Melissa, you said the thing about basically not going for positive comments or negative comments. Like, intellectually, I think that's the best, but I don't always live up to that, And so there's a thing I've heard people say about the challenge is to care about people, but to not care about their opinions. And that is the kind of thing I'm striving for. But I think as writers, part of what makes us want to write is that we're trying to communicate some vulnerable part of the human condition. And so we're putting some of ourselves in there, we're opening our hearts up. And so it's hard to open our hearts to create it and then close our hearts as soon as somebody has something bad to say. So it's interesting to hear like all the ways that you guys are talking about dealing with it. I think that's really helpful. We have a few questions here. Somebody gave a shout out to Jenny for not being on social media. So good for you there. I agree with that. Let's see.
Just
the
because my
most recent one
mental
was,
health
what do you
already-
think about?
Sorry.
Right on. Let's see. What do you think about blurbs? What if a publisher gets a writer who you don't particularly admire to endorse your book? How can a newish writer navigate the gap between gratitude and humiliation? Anyone have thoughts on that?
About the blurb question?
Yeah.
I like how they call them puffs in England, just puffs. Oh, he did a puff for your book. That
I
seems
did not
very
know that.
That feels so much more accurate.
kind of accurate, right? Yeah. Well, I feel like that navigating the gratitude and humility, it seems like a lifelong task for all of us, whether you're a writer or not. But I also feel like as a writer, just the swings that I know I have between kind of grandiosity and self-loathing and back again means that you can feel particularly susceptible to criticism if it hits you on one of the self-loathing days. But I always say sometimes to my workshop students, like, I think part of the workshop is actually learning to withstand criticism, that learning what voices you want to listen to and what is interesting to you, and also what things feel like they're just trying to hammer all the strangeness or mystery or darkness out of your work. Those are the voices you don't want to listen to because you don't want to be put into the kind of constraints that they're asking for.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, I would also
go ahead.
I would also say about blurbs that it's tricky. Like, if I had it my way, it would be like such a marketing flop, it would. And I really have tried to sort of focus on the creation of the book is my job, right? I will exert as much control as I can, and I will make it exactly to my taste or as close as I can get it, right? And the things that happen after it, like even the blurbs, or it's just like it's capitalism. Like, it's just going to shit all over everything to a certain extent. And so I don't know. It's like, I don't think your publisher should probably be getting blurbs from writers you don't like without consulting you. But like, if that happens, I also think it's sort of, my job is creation, their job is selling it. And so short of like an offensive cover, which I have had to avoid a few times, I try to just let go of that part, because it's like, if I try to start controlling it in my mind and caring about every little thing, like, it sort of ruins the experience for me.
That's really strong. Reminding ourselves that art and commerce, even though they work together, are separate. And if you can just focus on the part that you're doing, you can be a little less uptight or have less anxiety about what the commerce part of things is doing. So there's this theme that we've been talking about, kind of taking some time with these comments. There was a Craig Ferguson who used to host the Late Late Show before James Corden. He said before he tweets anything, he asks himself 3 questions. The first is, does it need to be said? The second is, does it need to be said now? And the third is, does it need to be said by me? And usually, if the answer to any of those is no, he doesn't tweet it.
Wow.
I think that's good guidelines for responding, because sometimes, especially on social media, you really want to respond. What are you gonna say, Melissa?
I was just going to say that I quoted that to my students in our workshop this morning,
Oh,
because they were asking about writing about sensitive issues, and I said that's always the first questions to ask about anything. You know, does the discourse need me to add this to it right now?
I mean, I
Yeah,
think
do you
Twitter
guys-
I feel like Twitter would disappear if everyone was forced to follow these. It would be sort of amazing. It would be like everything would just, there'd be a few lone excellent voices, but yeah, certainly not most of the things I think to put out there. That's, yeah.
Do you guys have any specific strategies for like mentally separating yourself? Because we talked about like, you know, it being a reflection more of them. They're conveying pain. When something kind of gets through your shield and gets to you, do you have a way of working through that? I know, profound questions.
Well, I think what you said about taking a day or two with it, or a week, when something really pierces you, to kind of think about it. I mean, the things that really, I tend to kind of invite readers and people in a little bit late in the game. Like, I work for a while on something before I show it to them, but I had an experience with the last book where I did show something kind of early on to a really good friend of mine who's a really good reader, and she had to say, like, hey, it's terrible, doesn't make any sense. I mean, it was really tough to hear, but I knew that she would only say that, nothing in her wanted to say that to me. So I took it very seriously. And in fact, it turned out to be kind of an excellent course correction. But I gave her a little card that Christmas that said, thanks for telling me my book was bad. Because it turned out to be useful. But, you know, it meant a lot that it was coming from her, because I already respected her, and I already knew that that there was nothing in her that was about gratuitous criticism. But, you know, that thing you said earlier about people's taking advice or from people, I always feel sort of like so many people want to tell you what you should do with your writing or with your life, and I just don't, in general, think you need to take advice from people who's either writing you don't admire or life you don't want. I mean, I just feel sort of like, why am I taking advice from someone that thinks everyone should write like straight up realist fiction, and anything that diverges from that is, you know, is insanity, or etc. So I feel like you got to kind of decide which voices align most with your values, and then be open to hearing criticism from them.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I'll say that something that's been helpful, like, I can know everything important to know about it, and it still just scalds sometimes. And, you know, I got this review on my last book, and it was ridiculous. It said that, you know, the reviewer was like, I don't like books like this. She should write a historical novel instead of like an experimental essay collection, which, you know, but like I was just carrying it around, and something that was actually really helpful was that I reached out to friends of mine who I knew had similar experience, and I actually sort of asked around, and it's just so comforting to talk to someone else, because there's an element of humiliation to it that feels really solitary, and it can sort of twist in you and turn into something that you feel like you are embarrassed of or ashamed of, and that makes no sense, right? But I think that there is something, it really lets the wind out of those sails when you talk about it with another person and realize how ordinary it is and how common, and it's just like one other person's opinion that happened to be very public, you know.
You guys know that expression that they use in counseling, you're only as sick as your secrets?
Oh boy, do I.
Right. Okay. So I feel like shame only really works with isolation, right? So what you're saying makes so much sense, Melissa, where when you have a trusted community, 1 or 2 friends, family, whoever it is, just being able to move it from in here out into the world makes it a lot less potent. It really helps me a lot. There's this weird thing where you can read 100 glowing comments and read 1 negative one, and the negative one is the one that you remember, you fixate on.
My
So I think
therapist
a
once
lot of
told
it
me that.
is,
Oh, sorry. You finish.
no, please go ahead.
I was
What'd
just
your
gonna say
therapist say?
I was talking to my therapist about that because an ex of mine was like so frustrated with me for focusing on like the one bad thing when I got all these like fan letters for my first book, and she made me cut and paste all of the good stuff into a document and save it. I wouldn't even read them, but just like for someday when I was capable of absorbing it. And my therapist at the time told me that she thought it was probably biological, that like our
It is.
focus
It's
on
the wiring.
was threatening. It's like we're wired to focus on the threat rather than the non-threatening.
Right. Yeah, see, I think so. All of that is about context, right? So, like I think talking with community, reminding ourselves, hey, this is not, I got 100 good comments. I got one negative comment, reminding ourselves that this is about their pain. It's not a reflection of who we are as people. There's just a lot of tools, but I think admitting to ourselves that we don't have to be bulletproof, that it can be a process, and we can just allow ourselves to work through that process, giving yourself a day or two, all those things are key, and they stop you from making bad decisions, reacting to people who aren't even invested. Like they write something like that, they might as well be writing about Michael Jackson or something. You know what I mean? Like they don't know you, they're just writing something, and they're not even invested in the outcome. It's not like you can rectify their impression of you. And I think the more that we can just kind of work to process and separate, the healthier we end up being. So we have about 6 minutes left. This is kind of the time that we kind of laid out for everybody to give a shout out to what they're working on. I don't know if there are any plugs that people want to do. I'll start. I got Anguish Garden coming out soon. It is I did a Kickstarter for it, so it's being self-published. And I got the weekly comic in the Colorado Sun. That's free. You can check it out for free. It's called What I Missed. That's what you guys saw. Burning Metrodome can be picked up places. And Motherfucker in the Cape is on iTunes and Spotify. How about Jenny? Do you have anything you want to plug?
Well, I just wrote a book.
Yes.
So that makes me happy because I don't have to have another book for a long, long time. But
what's it called? That was fast. What's it called?
Oh, sorry. It's called Weather.
Nice.
And that's out now. And if you want to wait for it to be out in paperback and be cheaper, that'll be around January. But so I'm enjoying, because this one took about 7 years. I'm enjoying for that feeling of not waking up with a heavy weight on my chest, which is oh God, gotta write the book. So nice. Yeah.
Okay, there's a link to Weather in the chat for anybody who's looking. Melissa?
It's awesome. I can vouch for it. I have Weather sitting on my table.
Nice.
Thank you. I paid her a little bit in the back room. We did a little exchange. Bitcoins, right? That's how they do it. That's how you have to bribe people.
Right. That's right. We're on the dark. She's not on Facebook, but we're on the dark web.
On the dark web, sure. I feel like on my deathbed, I'm going to be like, why wasn't I ever on the dark web, man? I think I did something wrong.
I missed out so much.
Jenny, you are on the dark web.
Am I? Oh, good.
You're all over the dark web. You're most of the dark web is stuff about you.
Oh, that's awesome. Like I'm like the dark matter of the universe, but in the web. So what about you?
Melissa, did you want to plug something?
I was sure. I have an essay. Hi. I have an essay collection coming out in March of next year. It's called Girlhood, and it has illustrations in it, not drawn by me, thank goodness. Yeah, that's it. And I'm working on a book about celibacy.
Cool. All right, Steve, what you got?
I don't have anything coming out. I'm writing a bunch of fiction. It will probably never be published. That's okay. And it, in a weird way, sort of the older I get, the more I sort of am trying anyway to, it sort of goes back to what Melissa was saying. I'm trying to really think about, well, what am I up to? How well am I writing? How deep am I getting into the struggle of whatever I'm writing about and those people? And then sort of uncoupling that from the marketing, the financial expectation, even whether it gets published. Now that is a sort of Zen Buddhist world that I am miles away from, but I increasingly, as I've gotten older, have just gotten exhausted of sort of the hard work that everybody knows who does any kind of serious creating of anything is just sitting there fucking doing it and being plagued by not
Right.
comments, but the doubts and bad voices that live inside you, which in fact, the comments are only reawakening. They're just blowing on those embers. So
Yeah.
what I've been trying to do is just sort of say, whatever, something will come out at some point. That's not my job to figure out who's going to put it in the world. It's to figure out what it's supposed to be. But I'll say real quick, just somebody was asking on the live chat, like, how do you get such a thick skin and write about all this, people who are calling your daughter a maggot? And then somebody else asked, Carolyn Flynn asked, my question is specifically about claiming my feminist voice. And I've had all these experiences aimed at minimizing me and silencing me, and it goes on. And I want to just say, without being, too, I don't know, generalizing too much, there is a gender aspect to this. Um, the reason I have a thicker skin is because I'm a dude in the patriarchy. I'm used to aggression. I don't have to silence my rage or my loud voice or my right to speak in public. And I'm also a white dude. So there's all kinds of ways in which the culture is saying all the time, I'm allowed to speak. I'm allowed to be in angry discourse. I'm allowed to raise my voice in protest, whatever it is, and sort of exalt my grievance. And when people who are in vulnerable communities or marginalized communities are trying to tell their story and have a voice in the world, they're up against a whole institutional set of feelings and attitudes and circumstances that exist around them and have also been internalized. So that's part of the reason I have a thick skin, because I was born on third base, if you see what I mean. My job is to figure out that I didn't hit a triple. And that's kind of all of our job. But part of the reason, Carolyn, that it's harder for you to not get discouraged or knocked off balance by other people's voices of doubt is because you're moving through the world as a woman. And if it, it's a patriarchal culture that is making you feel at all times like, I shouldn't raise my voice. Do I really have the right to say that? So I just wanted to kind of try to connect those two things a little bit.
Hey, Steve, I appreciate that, man. I think that was good. We are right at the end of our time. So I want to thank everybody, all the people that we can't see who tuned in. I want to thank all of our panelists. Thanks, Steve, Jenny, Melissa. Thank you all. Thank you, Andrea, for making it all possible. Mike, for making it technical. We will see you all later.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
Well, thank you, Alan.
All right.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.